Okay, and then lastly, in example 5, we are asked to find the inverse of f of x equals x squared plus 2, but then they say with the domain, x is less than or equal to 0. Well, let's think about what f of x equals x squared plus 2 would look like. That's a parabola that opens up whose y-intercept is at 2. Well, we just learned about our horizontal line test. So what we notice about this guy is that it would fail pretty much anywhere you draw it, right? So what we do is we say, well, okay, fine. Let's only talk about when x is less than or equal to 0. So if you think about your x-axis, we've got 0 smack in the middle, and we've got our negative values off to the left and our positives off to the right. We only want the x coordinates that are less than or equal to 0. So that means we only want the left half of our graph. So we have to restrict our domain when our function fails the horizontal line test in order to talk about its inverse and talk about that as an inverse function instead of just an inverse relation. So what we do, we still find our inverse function in the same fashion. We just say y equals x squared plus 2. I swap x and y, and then I solve for y. So I subtract 2 from both sides, equals y squared, and I square root both sides. Now, remember that when we square root, we normally take the plus or minus square root. So normally we would have y equals the positive or negative at square root of x minus 2. Now, if we think about what this would do to our graph, it actually makes a sideways parabola, which is kind of fun. And what we want though, okay, if we only wanted the negative x coordinates, remember way back to how we defined inverse relation, we said that all of our x's become our y coordinates. So instead of having a restricted domain of x is less than or equal to 0, this tells us that we only want our range of our inverse to be y is less than or equal to 0 because our x's and our y's swap places. So if I only want negative y's, do I only want the top half of my graph or the bottom half? I only want the bottom half of my graph. So we can use our deductive reasoning, and we'll learn more about this tomorrow when we graph square root functions. But we only want this bottom half, so we can take a good guess and say, well, that's probably the negative. I don't want the positive in there. So my inverse function is, oops, barely had room, negative square root of x minus 2. When they restrict the domain like that, they're saying that they recognize that your original function is not going to not going to pass the horizontal line test. So they just say, you know what, let's just cut off part of it. So don't let that freak you out. Just pay attention to whether they're going to want the positive half or the bottom half, which we can tell based on how they restrict the domain.